The Opel Omega A is the first generation Omega that Opel built between the late 1980s and early 1990s, 1986 to 1993. It replaced the long-running record and aimed to give buyers a modern, aerodynamic, comfortable rear-wheel drive saloon and estate that could cover everything from everyday family use to fast long-distance driving. Positioned under Opel's top-of-the-line Senator B, which was made until 1993. It was launched in 1986 and was produced in most markets until 1993 to 1994. The Omega also won European Car of the Year in 1987 and became the basis for high-performance limited editions and for badge-engineered variants sold under the GM brands, like the Vauxhall Carlton for the UK and the Chevrolet Omega made between 1992 to 1998. The Omega A's body is a clean, streamlined 4-door saloon or a 5-door estate with a low drag coefficient. Opel targeted aerodynamics and achieved a very good CD, as it was only about 0.28 for the saloon. Styling was functional and restrained, which the car had a long bonnet, a simple horizontal grille and integrated bumpers made of plastic, with the caravan estate showing a squared rear for load space. Over the production in life, Opel applied a facelift in 1990, but the face stayed the same. It stayed recognizable, and the facelift gave the car a fresher, modern look. The bumpers were redesigned and made smoother with now body-colored sections on higher trims, and also the front grille became more rounded and integrated with the headlights, which were also updated for a sharper appearance. Side mirrors were also reshaped and larger, improving visibility, and at the rear the taillights were restyled and with a clearer lens layout, and the boot lid trim was revised for a cleaner finish. Overall, the car looked more aerodynamic and closer to Opel's early 1990s design language. Inside the Omega A, you find a roomy, straightforward cabin aimed at comfort on long trips. Dashboard and control follow late 1980s ergonomic ideas, which featured basically clear instrumentation, central ventilation, and an audio stack, for example, on the higher trims, and a high, comfortable seating position. Higher trims add wood or polished trim strips, also some better upholstery, cloth or leather options, and more sound insulation and convenience items such as air conditioning, electronic windows, and better audio, and even a board computer and heated seats. The caravan's rear was very practical and the boot opening is very generous, and overall the interior focuses on quiet cruising and everyday usability rather than flashy sportiness, which the car also had. The Omega A covered a wide range of engines to match different markets and buyers, from a 1.8-liter 4-cylinder petrol engine to a 2.3-liter diesel, and even a 3-liter or a 3.6-liter in the sportier versions. It all started with the least powerful 1.8N, which was a carbureted engine with a catalytic converter, having 80 horsepower, being available between 1986 to 1987. This engine had 135 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of between 15 to 15.7 seconds, depending on if it's a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic. And the top speed was 170 to 176 km an hour, with an average fuel consumption of around 9.5 liters per 100 kilometers. Of this engine, you also had a normal without a catalytic converter, also available between 1986 to 1987, but having more power of 86 horsepower and 140 Nm of torque, giving the car a better 0 to 100 time of 14 to 14.7 seconds, and also a higher top speed of 173 to 179 km an hour, all while having a lower fuel consumption of 9.2 liters per 100 kilometers. You also had a super petrol engine variant made between 1986 and 1990, having 89 horsepower, 148 Nm of torque, and a 0 to 100 time of 14 to 14.5 seconds, and also a top speed of 177 to 183 km an hour. Fuel consumption was much lower because this engine used super petrol, as the combined fuel consumption was 7.4 to 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers. And of this engine, you also had a fuel-injected variant available between basically almost the whole production period of 1986 to 1992, having 113 horsepower, 116 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time pretty decent at 12 to 13.5 seconds, and also a very high top speed of 190 to 195 kilometers an hour, all while having a acceptable fuel consumption of 7.6 to 7.9 liters per 100 kilometers. You also had a 2-liter injection available the whole production span of 1986 to 1993, having 121 horsepower, 175 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 10 to 12 seconds, and also a top speed of 193 to 200 kilometers an hour. The fuel consumption was also very decent at 8 liters per 100 kilometers, and this engine actually was one of the best chosen ones among buyers. This engine also had a catalytic converter as an option, also available between the whole production period, but having a bit less power at 115 horsepower and 117 newton meters, giving the car a 0 to 100 time a bit slower at 11 to 13 seconds, and also a bit lower of a top speed between 190 to 195 kilometers an hour. And because of the catalytic converter, also the fuel consumption was a bit higher at 8.4 liters per 100 kilometers. Later in 1988, Opel also introduced a 2.4 liter injection with a catalytic converter standard and having a bit more power than the 2 liter with catalytic converter, as this engine had 123 horsepower, 195 newton meters of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 10.8 to 11.5 seconds and a top speed of 198 to 200 kilometers an hour. Because this engine was still a 4-cylinder but a 2.4 liter instead of a 2 liter, the fuel consumption was higher, rated at 9.2 to 9.3 liters per 100 kilometers. Opel later also introduced a 2.6 liter. This was a 6-cylinder engine and also was only available with a catalytic converter. And this was available up until 1993 and had 148 horsepower, 220 newton meters of torque, giving the car a actually very decent 0 to 100 time of 10.4 to 10.8 seconds and a top speed of 210 to 215 kilometers an hour. Because this was actually the first 6-cylinder engine with the smallest engine size, the fuel consumption still was higher than with the 4 cylinders, as it was between 10.1 to 10.3 liters per 100 kilometers. The upfollowing engine actually was more power specified, as this was the 3000i with a catalytic converter available between 1986 to 1988. And this had 154 horsepower, 230 newton meters, giving the car a actually quite comparable 0 to 100 time as the 2.6 liter of 9.8 to 10.8 seconds and a top speed of 210 to 217 kilometers an hour. Because this engine was bigger than the 2.6 liter and also had a catalytic converter, the fuel consumption was higher at 10.7 to 11.4 liters per 100 kilometers. But of this engine, you also had the 3000i without catalytic converter, and this was available up until the end and made just more power overall, since the catalytic converter just killed some horses under there. This engine had 174 horsepower, 240 newton meters of torque, and this increase in power gave the car a better 0 to 100 time of 8.8 to 9.8 seconds, and a top speed also higher at 222 to 227 kilometers an hour. Therefore also, the fuel consumption combined was lower at 10.5 to 11.2 liters. And later Opel actually succeeded this engine with the 3 liter 24 valve engine available between 1990 and 1993, and this had between 201 to 204 horsepower, 270 newton meters of torque, and a 0 to 100 time of 7.6 to 8.6 seconds, and also a top speed of 235 to 240 kilometers an hour, all while actually having a very decent fuel consumption of 10.4 to 10.6 liters per 100 kilometers. Besides these petrol engines, you also had a choice of diesel engines, as between 1986 to 1993 you had 3 diesel engine choices, And between 1986 to 1993, the 2.3 liter diesel without a turbocharger was one of them. This had 73 horsepower, 138 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time okay-ish at the time of 19 to 21.5 seconds, and the top speed also very decent of 155 to 163 km an hour, all while having a very low fuel consumption of 6.7 liters per 100 kilometers. In 1986, you also had the 2.3 liter turbo diesel, available between 1986 to 1988, as it was succeeded after that by a better engine, and this had 89 horsepower, 190 Nm of torque, giving the car a much better 0 to 100 time of 14.5 to 16 seconds and a top speed of 176 km an hour. The fuel consumption was a bit higher at 7.2 liters per 100 kilometers, but yeah, the power was much better with this engine. In 1988, this engine was succeeded, as said before, and yeah, it got succeeded by the same 2.3 liter turbo diesel, but with more power, as this engine now had 99 horsepower, 218 Newton meters, and a 0 to 100 time also a bit better at 14 to 15.5 seconds, and also a higher top speed of 184 kilometers an hour, all while having a very comparable fuel consumption of 7.2 to 7.3 liters per 100 kilometers. You might have seen some engines on here, but of the Omega A, there were many special versions and high performance variants, such as the Omega 3000 and also the 24 valve, which basically was a higher tuned 3 liter 6-cylinder engine with 156 to 177 to even 204 horsepower, depending on if it had or did not have a catalytic converter. And you also had the Evolution 500 made by Opel's tuner Irmscher, which was a homologation special prepared to allow competitive versions for touring car racing series, of which 500 road cars were built, and these were available between 1991 to 1992. The power figures and chassis changes made it quicker than the regular 3 liter models, and the 0 to 100 time claims were around the high 6 seconds to 7 seconds. At the top of the line was the Lotus Omega, or the Lotus Carlton for the Vauxhall name, as Lotus took the Opel or the Vauxhall platform and produced a high-power twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine with a 3.6 liter turbo engine, producing around 360 to 380 horsepower in many sources, heavy re-engineering, special gearboxes and tires, and production numbers between the Vauxhall and the Opel versions added to roughly 950 cars in total between 1990 and 1992. Of those 950, 320 were Vauxhall Lotus Carltons, which were the right-hand drive for the UK, and 630 were left-hand drive Opel Omegas. Between 1986 and 1993, 961,396 Omega A's were made, making the car very successful and a good choice for people from any part, basically with interest, as you had a 1.8 liter, but also a more powerful 2.4, 2.6, and also, just 3 liter, making the car very comparable to the Senator, in my opinion, though not really measurement-wise. And competition-wise, main rivals were executive large family cars, such as the Mercedes-Benz E-Class of the W124 series and BMW's 5 Series E34, for example. As the S-Class and the 7 Series were actually competing with the Opel Senator. And predecessor and successor-wise was actually pretty interesting, as the Opel Omega A succeeded the Opel Rekord, which basically was a whole model line replaced by the Omega, and the successor was the Omega B that followed the A in 1994, and basically was made in two phases, the B1 and the B2, which out of my head was succeeded in 1998 by the B2, and later also the Opel Signum is sometimes described as a later indirect successor in Opel's lineup, but also the later Opel Insignia A. Thank you for watching this video. In order to be able to upload more videos, please consider becoming a member of my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.